On December 16, 1944, the Axis powers launched a counteroffensive against the Allied powers, who had recently liberated Paris. This attack was the last hope for the Axis powers to turn the tides of World War II in their favor. However, U.S. troops and their allies triumphantly defended their positions against the Germans, who lost the Battle of the Bulge. Tragically, approximately 81,000 Allied casualties occurred. This battle helped bring about the inevitable fall of Germany, due to the Germans using all of their remaining resources to attempt one last counterattack against the Allies. By early December 1944, Nazi Germany was surrounded on all fronts by the Allies. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union was closer to reaching Germany's homeland. On the Western Front, the Allies were beginning to step into Rhineland. The Allies had also recently liberated the important supply port of Antwerp, Belgium. Before the liberation of Antwerp, the Allies were extending their supply lines as far as they could go, putting a strain on their resources and time. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery did not believe Germany can launch a counterattack against the Allies, and in a cable addressed to General Dwight D. Eisenhower, he said, "The enemy is at present fighting a defensive campaign on all fronts. His situation is such that he cannot stage major offensive operations. He has not the transport or the petrol that would be necessary for mobile operations, nor could his tanks compete with ours in the mobile battle." Adolf Hitler wanted to slow down the inevitable downfall of Germany by recreating the same plan he used in 1940. Hitler had used the Ardennes before to trap Allied troops in an encirclement. That event led to significant loss for the Allies at the beginning of the war, which led to the fall of France. This defeat is also what led to the evacuation at Dunkirk. Hitler hoped he could recreate his past successes. This time, Hitler wanted to push through the Ardennes and use the force as cover, so the Allies would have no idea that the Germans were coming. A diary in one of Hitler's meetings states he had resolved to mount a counterattack from the Ardennes, with Antwerp as the target, split the British and American armies at their seam, then a new Dunkirk. Our offensive will begin in the bad weather period when the enemy air force is grounded. The diary was written by a relatively unknown general at the War Council, Werner Kreit. Hitler's ultimate goal was to capture Antwerp so the Allies would not be able to resupply. Their plan was to use the horrible weather to their advantage. The snow would prevent the superior Allied air force from defending against the counterattack. Unfortunately for the Americans, they had weakly defended the Ardennes because they thought it naturally impenetrable. On December 16, 1944, Germany initiated their attack against the Americans at the Ardennes, near the village of Lanzerath. They launched 200,000 Germans against the 80,000 beaten and bruised Americans. Though Germany had originally planned to begin the offensive in November, they didn't have the resources due to air raids. The night before the attack, Germans had landed paratroopers disguised in U.S. uniforms behind enemy lines. These soldiers cut communication lines and did their best to sabotage the Allies. The Americans caught and later executed many of the soldiers as war criminals. At the village, a single platoon under the command of Lieutenant Lyle Booth was able to slow down the German advance drastically. Though they were ultimately defeated, it was still important because the Allied troops further behind the lines were able to better prepare. In a letter from General Dwight D. Eisenhower to General Omar Bradley, Eisenhower states, "This is just to remind you the vital importance of ensuring that no Meuse bridges fall into enemy hands. If necessary, service units should be organized at once to protect them." In this letter, Eisenhower stresses the importance of not letting the Germans cross the Meuse, and that all men needed to stop the German advance. About 30 miles southwest of Lanzerath lay Bastogne. The Germans decided to take the city because it was a transportation hub. General Eisenhower sent 3 military divisions to protect against the takeover of Bastogne. One of those divisions, the 101st Airborne, he deployed to the city to keep it out of German hands. They reached Bastogne on the 19th, and General McAuliffe gained control of small remnants of a variety of units. By December 20th, 1944, The 101st Airborne was surrounded on all sides by the German 47th Panzer Corps. The division was completely cut off from resources and backup from Allied forces. They were truly alone. Though the American forces were surrounded, the Germans struggled to take Bastogne. So, the Germans changed course and decided to send the majority of their troops towards the Meuse. They left behind their 26th Infantry Division and 5th Parachute Division to take Bastogne. A German general, Heinrich Freiherr von Leutwitz, tried to over-exaggerate the number of soldiers that were surrounding the town and told American General McAuliffe to surrender the town or they would release all of their forces into the city. The division operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard, remembered his initial response. They want to surrender? No, sir. They want us to surrender. Nuts! And said this to the Germans as his official reply. Northeast of Bastogne, the town of St. Vith was finally taken by the Germans on the 21st. However, the American effort slowed the German advance drastically. A letter from Bernard Montgomery to Dwight D. Eisenhower reads, "Elements of 7th Armored Division with some other troops are still holding out in the general area about St. Vith, and there is no doubt that the brave work of these troops is slowing up enemy movement into the penetration area and westwards." Eisenhower relayed a message to all of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The enemy is making his supreme effort to break out of the desperate plight into which he forced him by your brilliant victories over the summer and fall. By rushing out from his fixed defenses, the enemy may give us the chance to turn his great gamble into his worst defeat. So I call upon every man of all the Allies to rise now to new heights of courage, of resolution, and of effort. We will, with God's help, go forward to our greatest victory. Eisenhower aimed to raise the morale of the soldiers who had been fighting for days. Luckily for the Americans, on December 23rd, the weather cleared. Hundreds of Allied bombers could now attack the German forces with offensive measures. Aircraft also dropped supplies to the encircled divisions in Bastogne. The Allied forces gained more and more resources as German resources dwindled. Near the last days of the battle, German prisoners of war stated they had been short of food for days. On December 24th, General Patton's 3rd Army began their counterattack from the south against the German lines. On Christmas Day, the 101st Airborne Division was able to successfully defend against the Germans who had breached the defenses of Bastogne. On December 27th, the siege around Bastogne was finally broken. Over the next few weeks, the Allies launched a number of successful counterattacks against the Germans in hopes of breaking the Bulge. This series of counterattacks led to the majority of U.S. casualties due to how desperately the Germans defended. On January 16th, the Germans were finally pushed back to where the initial German offensive began. The Battle of the Bulge was a horrific battle during World War II that tragically led to approximately 80,000 American casualties and about 81,000 German casualties. This battle saw one of the highest fatality rates for American troops. 10,000 of those casualties were killed during the battle. 10,000 men that would never be able to experience love, remorse, anger, or joy ever again. 10,000 men who would never again see their families. 10,000 men who laid down their lives in the name of victory. At the Battle of the Bulge, millions of memories and experiences were lost that can never be recovered. This was truly the tragedy of this battle. However, Americans showed that they were resolved to stand their ground in the face of insurmountable odds. They triumphantly defended against thousands of German soldiers. The men of the 101st Airborne Division that denied Germans the important city of Bastogne were a perfect example of the type of men who fought in this battle. The Allies used all of their willpower and strength so the Germans would not be able to delay the downfall of the Third Reich any longer. The decisive battle in the West contributed heavily to the fall of Germany and the Nazi Party. It also ensured that Germany would never be able to launch another counterattack. On May 2nd, 1945, the Soviet Union was successful at the Battle of Berlin, and here Hitler committed suicide when he realized all hope was lost. A few days later, on May 7th, 1945, the German Empire officially surrendered to the Allied powers.